I'm Brodor, and this is Why We Game. Today's guest is Alex Yeager. Alex is an originator of the tribe. He's a doughy, middle-aged white man from Michigan. Alex is also the COO of Amigo Games, and I have to tell you, folks, my experience in the industry is significantly shorter than Alex's, but I have seen him in and out of conventions, both personally and professionally over the years. I'm very excited to have him on the show. And if you are a grognard, like many of my listeners, I've got dollars to donuts that you're going to recognize this voice. Alex, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I am fantastic. I am so excited to have you here. We spoke recently at a convention. I believe it was Gen Con, but before that, I got your previous business card out when you were working for Steve Jackson Games. So as we talked about kind of in the pre-interview, I want to talk about you as a gamer and then transition into your professional career as a gamer and an ambassador for the hobby industry. But before we get back in the Wayback Machine and talk about you getting into the hobby, how long have you been working in the industry and how many different hobby companies have you worked for?
So I think we can, if we actually talk about simply professional paid jobs, basically that number is 3. Mayfair Games, Steve Jackson Games, and Amigo Games currently. If we talk about the kind of the whole breadth of experiences, which includes things like demoing and whatnot, then that list widens out pretty considerably and actually starts at Steve Jackson, moves into Cheap Ass Games version 1, and then at the end of the day, then we start to see Mayfair kind of pick up again, and then it becomes Mayfair, Steve Jackson, Amigo there through the end. So, and there's an awful lot of overlap that happens there, as is the case so often in this industry.
Well, no,
you may have a primary gig, but there are side gigs.
The industry is as incestuous as the Missouri boot heel, and I should know because I'm a good old Missouri boy. You know, it's that close to Arkansas, you cannot help but the inbreeding. Yeah, it's amazing over the years, though, the number of people that you will see, faces who have moved from one company to the next because you've developed these really great long-term relationships in an intimate industry.
And that happens for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, there are just relationships between companies that exist all over the place for purposes of things like licensing or spin-off products or whatever that might be. But in particular, licensing is really the glue that holds a lot of the U.S. companies and the European companies together, that have had working relationships. So yes, I'm working for Amigo Games now, but I've had 20 plus year working relationships with a few of the people at Amigo because we worked very closely with Amigo when I was at Mayfair. Anyone who remembers things like Pompeii or some of the early games, I did English translations for Pompeii, for a game called Gangster. There's a variety of those titles that were part of the DNA of both of those companies, and so just by blowback information, I was very aware of Amigo and very familiar with what they do. And as you say, the other side of the fence is if you look at someplace like an Essen, and this is really the case in almost any game convention that you go to, with the exception of New York Toy Fair. New York Toy Fair is the most joyless, soulless game fair in existence.
It looks like hell. Just the pictures look like hell.
Yeah, it's everywhere else you go, and Essen is probably the best example of this. Rather than people kind of all locked up in their booths, staring daggers at any of the competitors that walk by, Essen is really a whole bunch of people from the industry running around going, "I made this year! I made this year!" And we're all and we're trading games and we're having all this excitement and just all this new stuff that we're all experiencing for the first time. And that's an environment that really does encourage making friends and creating those relationships personally and professionally that may bear fruit down the line. And it's one of the best reasons to be nice to everyone in a sense, because you never know when you're either going to be hiring somebody or they're going to be hiring you.
May I ask how old you are?
I am 55 for another couple of days.
So are you technically, are you a Capricorn?
I have no idea what I am other than born on February 3rd.
Okay, I would have to look it up. I think that might be too late to still be Capricorn. Not that I buy into all of that garbage, but I'm a Capricorn, and, a lot of gregarious and verbally active folk tend to be. Any which way. So you said 55?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not much older than I am. I have an older brother who is almost exactly your age, very, very close in age, who got me into gaming. So you're a child of the 70s and 80s then. Did you start getting into gaming when you were young, or was it something that you found older?
We had games in our house and played games, I think, just kind of casual background stuff. The Monopolies and whatnot of the world. The one weird thing that wandered into the house, into my house, I remember very distinctly as a kid. Later down the line, I was able to find a copy of it. There was a University of Michigan professor that did this thing called whiff and proof. And it was basically a set of dice that were designed to teach set theory. And it was a series of exercises, and I was fascinated by this thing.
May I interrupt? I'm sorry. For someone like myself who is not educated, what is set theory?
So basically, it's about using the symbols that are used to describe things like this set is a part of this set, and basically being able to define those relationships in such a way, sort of logic puzzle stuff. So being able to say if A is B and B is C is AC, is B part a subset of A? How do those things work together? And these dice basically use the mathematical symbols that are used as part of describing sets, and you would roll them and try to make basically correct logical strings or chains with the symbols that you've rolled. And it was a really interesting exercise. And I don't know why I kind of hooked on that, but whiff and proof was one of those, kind of the oddball thing I could point to in my house and go, that was really kind of an interesting exercise mentally for me that kind of fits that later game thing. But really for me, the beginning of my game awareness, game playing was in high school. I had some friends who were older who, when they later graduated, they were over at the University of Toledo. And there were many, there were certainly a non-zero number of days that I might not have been in school, but I might have been at the university playing Cosmic Encounter. And that game in particular is the one. That is the game. I still have my original Eon set of that, and it is roached out. I mean, it is just nasty and beat up, and every card is a marked card, and it's awful. And it is still, but that particular set got hauled to pizza places, and it got hauled to game clubs and everything. It was pretty much nonstop use for a decade. And that game in particular, followed closely by Illuminati. I remember being particularly taken with that game when I ran into that.
Illuminati, it is the devil. The worst fight. My wife and I have been together for almost 30 years. We started dating when we were 17. And the worst fight we've ever gotten into was over that game. I was a complete and utter prick. I mean, just unforgivably sore sport, just totally threw a fit, man. I was so angry and inappropriate and so wrathful. And we've never played that game. I've personally never played that game ever again.
Well, if it's any consolation, if you ever do want to revisit it, I developed some solitaire rules that have been published now through Steve Jackson Games. So you can play the game by yourself, which is great. So now you can avoid all the arguments with other people and just basically beat up on the servants of Cthulhu as an exercise.
All right. That may be doable. I have heard an urban legend from a very, very close source, and I want to determine if this urban legend is true. Does the Illuminati have an anti or no kingmaker rule, or did it ever?
Never. Okay. Oh, no.
Okay.
In fact, I specifically can remember an instance where we were playing Illuminati And this was while I was not attached to the company. So I was playing this as a player, which meant I was playing it semi-aggressively. We sat down for a 4-player game. It was myself, an older gentleman, and 2 like 13, 14-year-old kids. So you're looking at a dynamic where it's sort of like the superpowers and the small powers, and you'd like the small powers to be on your side. So I introduced them to the idea of the point to piss, which is, okay, I've got, I've done this, I've done my math, and the roll is a 10. Well, there's a mega buck, it's a 9. Throw a buck in. And now it's a 9. And, the kids over here are going, oh, hey, that looks like fun. So they start doing the 9. And the other guy just walked up and walked away. He had enough of that. So, it's the aggressive way to play. But no, ultimately, absolutely, it's a king. You can look around the table and you can see who's ahead, except for those with hidden goals, which means they're always the ones ahead. And ultimately, the way that game avoids it is not to say, let's put rules in place to not go after the king. It's to make enough stuff hidden that you can't quite tell who the king is. And if there are enough people who are king, if you're being very obvious about, hey, I'm one group away from winning, then yes, everyone's going to beat up on you. You can bury a 50 megabuck note under something as Bavaria, or if you can, do something to kind of hide the fact that, you've got the ability to win and then make that big reveal in order to win. That's the way you win Illuminati. It's not being the front runner. It's about being able to hide enough stuff long enough to get to where you can make that final push.
I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'd never again will I play, even if my experience with my wife had not occurred. I now understand the game better. I can't be that guy. I'm too raw and reactionary.
I was just going to say as a follow-up, it is interesting that there are games, and Illuminati is one of them, and another great one is a game called Intrigue that Amigo and Mayfair both published for a while. There are games that give you permission to act poorly. And I don't mean necessarily act poorly in the sense that I'm going to be a jerk about things, but you created a game rule. And if you're not familiar with Intrigue, and there may be people who are unfamiliar with Illuminati, and I apologize for all the Illuminati talk that we haven't defined that, but
I oscillate between really trying to help the listener understand if they're not members of the initiated, but sometimes during the course of conversation, I become so enthralled because I'm fascinated by what the guest is saying that I kind of think, fuck them. So anyway, Intrigue.
So Intrigue, to give you just the quick 30-second overview, you are basically playing the Lord of a mansion. You've got 4 jobs you're hiring for at different salary levels, fixed salary levels. And each turn, your job is to pay the people who are working for you, hire people to fill any jobs or replace jobs that you may have in your mansion, and then send out 2 of your good-for-nothing layabout cousins to go get jobs with other people to bring money in for you. And the middle of that game, the negotiation phase, is literally someone has arrived at the mansion. They are going to give you the sales pitch, however friendly or threatening or whatever it might be. At the end of that process, they have to give you a bribe. There must be a bribe on the table. It must be at least a certain amount of money. It can be any amount of money beyond that. If there are multiple people, each of them must give you a bribe. And at the end of that negotiation, if there's an open job, you have to hire somebody. You are not required, though, to respect anything that has been said in that previous negotiation. I can literally say, I've got this $10,000 job here. It's open. You send somebody. We have a great conversation. Here's, $8,000 to grease the rails. And I throw you over here in the 1,000 because that was open as well. And I want people to still be able to negotiate about the 10,000. Or it's 3 people have come and, one person gives you a $20,000 bribe. This person gives you a $1,000 bribe. And considering things, it's like, you know what? This person's probably further away from winning than that person. So you basically take the 20,000 guy is chucked down to what we call the island of misfit relatives or whatever, and they're out of the game. It's gone. That piece never exists again. And you hire the person at 1,000. Just and in some of these cases, it's a doomed negotiation. You are going into this going, you son of a bitch. I hate you. You're gonna just send me off to this island. It makes me angry to even think about that. I have to talk to you. Here's your $1,000 minimum bribe, and you can go to hell. And yes, and then he throws you on the island and everything is where it is. But at the end of the day, it's a game that creates a situation that you as a player have permission to literally lie if the situation requires for it. It's the ability to be really poor game behavior to someone if the situation requires it. And, Illuminati went so far as to publish cheating rules in one of the expansions where, and our group was, infamous, the part of the reason our set was so roached out is because, you do this kind of number. It's like, I'm watching the game. And then I go to get my change, and I've got however much money is stuck to my hand, and I pull back in and add to my pile, and that's
So you would lick the base of your hand there, just above your wrist.
Oh, absolutely. You would have this little paper money. It was all you had to do was just get a little bit of tension there on it, and you could pick up all kinds of money there.
Only,
and so it was a cheating game. You literally couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't get up from the table. You were staring daggers at everyone to make sure that no one was doing any kind of shenanigans. And of course, if you did go up, you had an emergency or whatever, and you had to get up, you came back to nothing. You came back to a bare structure with no money on it. We have no idea how this happened. It was,
Did you ever just clean your board, right? Just take all your money, all your cards, everything, and put it in your pocket before you went to the can?
Well, yeah, and that was the thing. You couldn't leave it. The stuff has to stay on your group. So you were always, and that's not the way. And that should be a type of game that is a infrequent amongst people who absolutely, ultimately that's the dichotomy of it is to play a game that requires that level of distrust. Usually means the closer to the friends you are playing this with, the better that experience will be. Because everyone can then step away from the experience that is giving you permission to do this and say, and now we're back in the real world where that is unacceptable, and be able to enjoy those experiences separately.
I think ultimately I'm merely too petty to engage in such things. I think that just I'm too much of a sore loser. Has it always been board games for you?
Yeah, I enjoy video games. I recognize that I would probably be one of the obsessives. With video games, I've never owned a console. I've had at various points in time. I really enjoyed, for example, playing through the Marathon trilogy back in the day, and that still as a touchstone. I was always, and for those people, this is a really deep dive on video games here, so I've got a little afield. But it's one of the best storytelling. There's an element in there in particular involving a sort of an AI called Durandal. That was one of the most moving storylines I had encountered to date as part of a video game. And it really did kind of give me the same vibe that you would get. That it was so easy to do storytelling sometimes in board game. We played a lot of Junta, for example. And oh my goodness, you couldn't, you can't get into Junta if you can't play that Banana Republic, bribing people and trying to make it to the bank without being assassinated. That is rife with storytelling opportunity. But to encounter that in a game that wasn't just a Space Invaders shoot 'em up, kind of thing, in the same way, I think I still actually have a computer here in the house that's got Warcraft 3 loaded on it. Because every so often it's fun to kind of get that out and kind of experience that storyline even in little discrete chunks sometimes. And then I have a series of like idle small games that I run on my computer and whatnot. A lot of implementations as well. So I'm a fiend for things like Ascension and the short deck builders in particular that I play an awful lot of on my iPhone, especially on trips and whatnot. But board game is where the passion is. Board games are that physical social experience. I think is so critical to what I want out of the hobby, to the point where, yes, even during quarantine, with all the Zoom and video options that were available, that just, it didn't scratch the itch. It felt much more like video gaming than it did actual physical face-to-face stuff. There's just so much social information encoded in a face-to-face experience that is just not there in a video experience. That I didn't do a lot of gaming during certainly the first round of quarantine because despite that being my really only option, I had my wife here, of course, as well, and so we could play 2-player stuff. But yeah, for me, it is the tangible, physical space board gaming that I'm most enamored with.
Is the physical face-to-face, the desire to interact, is this because it's innate just due to being human? Is it because we're old? I worry that the generations that are getting into gaming now are going to become so accustomed to a digital platform that that's going to become the norm, and that scares me.
I am less pessimistic in the sense that, it's the same story we've heard for a decade plus, is how can you still be making board games when there are all these amazing video games out there? And because people effectively want to be able to come home and perhaps, for some period of time, turn off the computer. Now, I think that current generations are much adept, if not better, at being able to integrate those things more organically. So it's not that all on, all off that my generation would experience, where it was a much more focused experience to run things on a computer, as opposed to having this little portable computer that can call up information and entertainment any moment at any time. Things are cyclical. I would expect that there comes a time, in the same way that we see this explosion of video, we also see, I think, an explosion in the world in general at the idea of valuing tangible physical art. You look at the various craftsmen and those people that are out there discovering, how to do certain techniques, even going down to things like glass blowing or woodworking or textiles or any of that stuff. There's a really skilled generation of people now that are doing things that are either reclaiming old skills or old techniques, or developing upon, some of these things that have perhaps laid stagnant for so long. And gaming, like anything else, is part of that experience, where as long as the hobby remains, in a sense, attracting people and finding ways to innovate, even if that innovation isn't leaps and bounds, the people who need it will find it, and the people who are interested in it will have something to be interested in.
Now, you mentioned story or building story in games a little bit ago. This game provides, like Junta, for example, provided for a great story. Did you ever get into role-playing games, or is it always been, again, in that never miniatures, never D&D, anything like that?
Yeah. I absolutely did a lot of role-playing through high school and college in particular. Started in D&D like most everybody else. Had my first edition D&D books taken away from me by my parents during the Satanic Scare of the late 70s.
Okay, hold on. All right, if I may. Thank God, because I've had so many people on the show that I wanted to talk to about the Satanic Panic who were like, "Oh no, my parents were great. Oh no, super supportive. Oh no, I was very encouraged to play D&D." All right, so your parents took your stuff.
Absolutely.
Why?
Didn't destroy it. Didn't do anything else. Put it on a shelf, and it stayed there for probably 2 or 3 years, and then I slowly replaced it. And every so often, it was something like, I can't replace that, so let's just go up there and pull that out and leave enough stuff there that the pile is still there. And for a household that did have a very strong religious background, and was definitely part of everyday life every day. Open up the monster manual and here's a bunch of illustrated demons, and that is something that would be intimidating to my parents in this case, but in general, those are two pretty incompatible things, to be blunt.
Yeah, and I wasn't celebrating, that wasn't Schadenfreude. I wasn't celebrating the fact that your parents were freaked out and that you lost your stuff. It's amazing to me that I've talked to so many people who grew up in that time period. They're like, "Oh no, my parents were cool with it."
Yeah, no, mine weren't, and that was very clear. So, so D&D was definitely through high school. In college, I was kind of all over the map. Although I think as I learned to develop my own voice as a DM, I very much gravitated towards the lighter stuff. So I played Justice Inc. I played Champions, but I ran Paranoia. I ran Teenagers from Outer Space. I ran the Systems Light stuff. And the last role-playing game that I was really into was Innomine from Steve Jackson Games. I really was taken with that setting and that the atmosphere that game could create. I love the idea of exploring these kind of interesting themes, morality and whatnot, as part of a very real world structure. And ultimately, that's kind of where I am with role playing right now. Is I'm not really interested in a lot of the high fantasy stuff. So D&D and Pathfinder, it feels like again, it feels like I'm reading a Tolkien novel, and I can only read so much Tolkien. I just and I know there are better and more sophisticated stories that are being told, but at the end of the day, I'm much more interested in even something like a cyberpunk or something that I recognize the world in, as opposed to creating worlds out of whole cloth.
How can you read any Tolkien?
I loved Tolkien when I was a kid. I mean, I definitely skittered to a halt about a third of the way through the Silmarillion, but I remember fondly reading Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and that was junior high reading, I think, for me. So I've revisited a couple of times here and there, but ultimately there's an awful lot of that, and but at the same time, I also have a tremendous amount of science fiction, and that's much more where my casual reading. I've got pretty much a complete set of Heinlein sitting over there in the old paperback formats, Asimov and a lot of that kind of stuff that I consumed as a kid, especially because and this was something that became relevant, I think, when the Foundation TV series launched. Is that Asimov, and going back even to something like Wells or Jules Verne, where it's very clear that this person is excited about a subject. I mean, literally, you look at the journey to the center of the earth, and it's like, we're going to talk about this nice professor who has these crackpot theories about reaching the earth. But first, we're going to take 6 pages and talk to you about cryptography and how to break codes and all this stuff, because that's really cool. And, Asimov was really, so much of what his writing did for me was less about, you think about the iRobot books, you think about Foundation, all this stuff. It's less about telling a story. It's most about, here's a really cool, really amazing high concept, and now we're just going to explore edge cases, And so this thing can live in your head, this high concept, and you can create all these stories and all these different things you can do about it. But, in the case of iRobot in particular, it's literally, boom, here's the 3 laws of robotics. This is amazing. I can, my brain can easily wrap around this, and my brain can see the universe of things that this provides. And now we're going to talk about little narrow slices of how one interacts with 2, how one interacts with 3, and how in practice these things may not overlap as cleanly as what the rule. And that is what the beauty of a lot of those stories are. It's really, it's coming up with these really interesting little edge cases and telling that little edge case story. And so for me, that's always been the fun of going back to role playing or whatever. It's coming up with these little edge case stories that I can tell. I mean, one of my favorite Innomine things I would run for conventions for years. It was, I may screw this up, but basically the angel who's in charge of commerce, business, would recruit our PCs, and their job. So this was set in Detroit, and the setting was we had contract negotiations, which happened every couple of years between the big 3 and the UAW to kind of set a contract, and usually it was. You pick the weakest of the 3. You'd create the UAW would get the contract set with them, and then take that contract to the other 2 auto manufacturers and set the contract, for everybody. And so the setting was we were in this room, and the UAW and General Motors, I think, was who I usually picked on because you had the big building, you had the Renaissance Tower in Detroit. It was a great object to kind of work around. And, negotiations have been going really hard, really tense. they're going to break for pizza, and then they're going to sign contracts. And your job as PCs was to get the pizza from the pizzeria down in Greektown to the Renaissance Tower unmolested, no problem. That was it. Just get the pizza from A to B so that nothing goes wrong and signatures are signed and all that. And of course, from there, we ran into a demon who could do short-term teleportation and bounce the car over to the other side of the river. So now you're in Canada and you're angels. You have passports. You got to get across the border now. And all of the stuff that would typically come into a role-playing game, trying to get the pizza while it was still fresh and hot into the hands in the room for the negotiation to happen. That to me was just always the best sort of role-playing setup I could do, which is this is all I could talk about streets. I could talk about downtown Detroit and the how you were going to get there, the tunnel, the bridge. Are you going to do a fight down the middle of Jefferson Avenue? What's going to happen? But put real world stakes and a real world vibe on it all, so that people could you could visualize literally a space in the real world on top of the fantasy of of these angelic characters trying to deliver pizza, which just as a concept itself struck me as amusing enough to tie a scenario around.
Yeah, so. I can certainly see why you were attracted to Paranoia.
Yes. Oh, and Paranoia was always, we could do all sorts of just stupid stuff. And for me, everyone would have their little flares. So for me, every time you were killed, there was always there's always that scene where they take clone number 3 into the room and they show a video of your previous clone's life that, kind of gets a little weird on the editing. At the end, it's just the stair step scene from Battleship Potemkin, the crazy, bomb throwing communists coming down. It's like, don't be this guy, don't be bomb throwing communists from Battleship Potemkin, and so that was, I just, absolutely, from both a sense of humor and from just being able to take a concept to its ridiculous extreme, Paranoia was absolutely up my alley.
Do you do code breaking or computer coding or anything like that for fun?
It was funny. About a year ago, I was cleaning some stuff out and I found like about a 50-page document, which was nothing but basic code that I had written trying to do kind of a simple wizard versus wizard battle game. As in junior high, we had access. I was working with a gifted student organization as a volunteer for their summer camp, and we had access to PET, the old PET computers. And so I definitely know that I was, if not fluent, very functional in BASIC at the time. I had a Commodore 64, so I played around with sprites and how that stuff came together. And the peak of my tech universe is probably Excel 4. I could make Excel 4 do all sorts of exciting and interesting things, but things move on. When I was there, kind of the Excel guru at my company, which was doing automotive research, by the way. So our automotive marketing research was my life. My first actual career for a very long time. I worked with a guy who used to work for General Motors as the guy who created pie charts. This is the guy who did nothing but create pie charts for General Motors presentations at $100 an hour. He would take it, he could draw the circle, he could mathematically come up with what part of the circle, he'd pick the right colors, label everything appropriately. And of course, Excel 4, it's like, create chart, pull down, pie chart. So for, you went from $100 an hour to being a functionary at our place, being able to just provide insight into the company and the way they use data. But his $100 an hour skill was absolutely, non-existent at that point. And ultimately that's, I look at tech that way, as I want to be able to know how it works and how it should functionally flow and be put together. But I'm not, I'm just not ready to go out and become that guru in anything digital at this point.
See, in my fantasy, you were in a former life a phone freak, and you are on the lam. Like, so basically, you had a terrible run-in with whatever precursor we have to Homeland Security many moons ago, and you had to give up the freaking, and you were so addicted to technology that you just walked away from it and have done analog gaming ever since.
It would be delightful if that was the case, but I wasn't even attached to Steve Jackson during the infamous, Secret Service raid. I came to them just a bit after that point. So, no, I can't say as I have anything romantic or illicit in my background that would say that, from a digital standpoint, that there's there's some faceless bureaucrat at the FBI, with a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old file going, I could just catch this man.
Yeager. Well, of course, that's not your real name. Yeah,
retire.
Yeah.
One last cold case, not to be.
But you do have broadcasting in your background, one that, or at least one that I was reading about on your LinkedIn, that does not relate to gaming, but you also have some broadcasting that really does relate to gaming. I cannot say this with certainty, but I would be willing to place money on that before other people like Rodney or were watching it played and Sit Down and Shut Up, et cetera, Dice Tower, you were doing white glove demos for Mayfair.
White glove demos and the Bob and Angus show are two very real manifestations of what my degree is, which is radio video broadcast. And I did public television. It's not volunteer work. I was absolutely paid for it. But so I've been part of TV production. I've done a lot of most of the jobs that are attached to that at public television stations. They were willing to every so often during the pledge-a-thons. I late night they'd kind of say, Alex, you want to come out and you want to run Switcher for this break? And it's like, all right, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And of course when I say that, we're talking about literally an entire huge panel of buttons and knobs and levers, and that I had to kind of make sure I was coordinating everything, not the little $400 box that now sits next to your computer and you push a button and it transitions everything beautifully and nicely and does all of that. I mean, I'm literally of the era where if you today were to come to me and say, Alex, the world depends on you being able to take these two pieces of half-inch tape and razor blade them and stick them together and make something. I'd be, okay, I've got that skill. I can do that. A razor blade, some tape, and a reel-to-reel machine, and we'll make this happen. But no, that sad to say that is not the case. No one really needs that skill too much anymore. But things march on. We learn what we need to for our jobs, and the older you get, and the more, in a sense, supervisory some aspects becomes easier to be able to step away and say, someone else can do this much better than what I could, even if this were to be the whole of my existence, and it is very much not.
How did the white glove demos start, right? Because if I remember correctly, nobody else at the time was doing that.
No. And really it came out of, we wanted to do demos. We wanted to have video demos that we could put out there for things. I wanted the ability to have a little fun with them. And interestingly, one of the mandates that came out pretty quickly as we were developing the concept was we did not want a person to be on camera for it, because by putting a person on it, we have now created some assumptions as to the people who would be playing this game. I think when you talk about the people today, where you're talking about hundreds of games, on a channel, no one's assuming that you need to look like or be Rodney to play a game that Rodney is reviewing. It becomes much, I think, a little more problematic when you as a company say, here's this person who is now going to be the face of our company. And being the face of our company, there are assumptions you make about the company based on the face that is now being presented to you. And so by having this little disembodied white glove running around, all of that was kind of stripped away, and we could focus on the idea of, yes, we had this little personality, this little 12-year-old boy who would run around in the form of a white glove and, mess up things and teach the game, and then would lose attention or go do something else. But it gave us the opportunity to have some fun, put some humor in it. And that's certainly an element of a lot of the podcasts nowadays. And still be able to provide all the relevant information that we needed for people to be able to play a game. And yeah, we produced close to 100 of them, I think, over the time that we did those. And most of that stuff, I think, has been scoured from the internet. I know the Bob and Angus stuff in particular, the current owner of the basically the current IP holder, I think, has been looking for ways to repurpose those ideas. And by repurposing them, they kind of have to be removed from Mayfair, because for so long those were Mayfair's thing. And even when we were shopping around the white glove demo concept, and no one wanted to touch it because everyone had that so closely attached to Mayfair Games that they didn't feel like, even though the concept was good, by putting their product up, it now becomes like you are part of Mayfair, and no one really wanted that. So, yeah, I mean, and in the case of the Bob and Angus show, it was just 4.5 years of writing for some pretty amazing people, some amazing performers, and having your words kind of come out in this going from a page and voices in your head into the form of two, 3 or more sheep, and watching that stuff execute in a really really fun way. The Don Dem, who died a couple of years ago, was a very, very good at being able to translate my whims of fancy into something that could actually be done on film or done on video. And so there are still episodes of that I can watch and just laugh my head off. Even though I wrote it, even though I've seen it, dozens of times at this point. When we got the writing right, the performances were right, and we had Stacey Gordon, who is the person who is currently driving Julia on Sesame Street, the autistic. I mean, she was our puppet wrangler. She was the person who was teaching our performers how to use a puppet properly, and was the person who was behind Claire. So Claire, our intern sheep, that's she is so far above our pay grade at this point, and we had that talent, early on in that. So it was great, and Stacey's just a wonderful human being. But yeah,
I'm gonna ask a very douchey question. Do you feel like that you were ahead of your time? Looking at what you produced with White Glove and with Bob and Angus, and now looking at what the internet and Twitch and YouTube have become for the industry, I feel like, and again, I mean, I don't think that hobby retail would be where it is without Dave Wallace. I wonder if gaming entertainment, if what you were doing inspired on some level or affected the hobby zeitgeist unbeknownst to you.
I think the larger question, or the way that I view it is, and there are those, I guess there are times where you can sit there, you can kind of wallow in I did that before everyone else, and so why aren't people at my doorstep ready to kiss my ring or whatever? Well,
no, that's why, Alex. That's why I'm here. That's why we're on the phone. That's why we're doing this so I can kiss the ring.
Yeah, but in a very real sense, I represent a point in time on a continuum, and I think the larger issue, and the thing that if there's a particular thing that I want people to look back on when I am no longer part of this industry, or when I am no longer on this, no longer living, as kind of what my legacy is. Yes, I've got my name on 300 plus products and all that good stuff. But going back as far as I think like the early 2000s, for 20 plus years, a lot of what I have been focused on has been how to get somebody to play your game, how to present your game in a way that people are going to be interested and excited to give it a try, and let them make their call after that. It's still out on the internet somewhere, but there's a seminar I did for Gamma, which for a Gamma trade show at some point, called the 222 seminar, and this was early on. I was part of, what I can literally say is I was part of probably the first organized play team in the industry, which was the Steve Jackson Men in Black program, founding member of the Cheap Ass Demo Monkey team, one of the first 5 people that was part of that team when that was founded in the early 90s. And my early 2000s was talking about the idea that the 222 concept is that so often you get people who are volunteers for a company who are passionate about a game and can really be excited about that game and go to a place and be excited about that game. But being excited about that game doesn't mean you are appropriately presenting that game to the audience that is in front of you. And so the 222 concept is that for every game that you intend to demo, to teach, to present, you need to have 3 versions of it ready. You need to have the 2-sentence version of your demo. You need to have the 2-minute version of your demo, and then the 2-play. So 222, 2-sentence, 2-minute, 2-play. And the idea that if you're in a store and someone walks up to you and they say, so what's this game? You're not starting with the 2-play demo. You're starting with either the 2-sentence, if this is a person who maybe is shopping for a gift for someone or is clearly just, caught their eye, or maybe it's the 2-minute demo because this person is a gamer, or you are familiar with them, they're able to process. And so you can talk a little bit more about goals and way the game works and all that sort of thing.
How is it that I was a retailer for over 15 years and I'm just now hearing the brilliance of 222? Obviously, I either was busy during that seminar or I wasn't at that particular show. When I was in retail, it was always the elevator pitch, right? With most people, you have a very short period of time. I basically have from the first floor to maybe the second or third floor to tell them this is why this game is good. Otherwise, the game needs to sell itself on the shelf. But the 222, that's solid advice.
And it really helps frame the way that you should, as a retailer, that's, and I was presenting this to retailers simply in a sense that this is information that you could give to a person. For example, Steve Jackson has, folks who are attached to stores. And as a retailer, it's not inappropriate to go up to a demo person and say, hey, sell me this game in 2 sentences. Sell me this game in 2 minutes. Being able to appreciate whether or not a person has that skill set and then how to use that person. If they don't have the ability in the sense of sophistication of reading someone socially to be able to understand the difference between those 3 things, then great, you put them at a table. And do you want to play the game? Let me bring you over here to this person. This person's going to teach you the game and how it works. Great. That's still a valid reason to have somebody as a demo person, but it's not going to be the person that you want being front facing to a customer, answering questions about the game just to gauge interest as opposed to, to play. So, to be able to understand that a demo person either has that skill or has a version of that skill or doesn't have that skill, is really important. So all of these things like the White Glove movies and Bob and Angus were all different approaches, all different angles we were taking to how do you present a game to somebody to get them to be interested enough to gauge interest to be able to perhaps explore it further. And in the case of the Bob and Angus show, sometimes it was just really short past, it was just 30 seconds on the way to the big story gag we were going to do for the week. So I look at the people that have come since and the people that are doing things now as saying they have taken a lot of this groundwork, whether it's consciously or just through osmosis of the industry itself, and are doing next level, next gen work, being able to do it with better tools, with better information, with a lot more of a body of work to be able to look around and look at best practices. So yeah, I admire it. I know that I can feel in my heart of hearts that there was a point in time that I feel like I was laying some cement perhaps as the foundation for all of this. But I also don't feel like things are built upon all the time. And dig down if you'd like to kind of look at some of that stuff. And certainly, there's nothing wrong with those White Glove movies, and there's nothing wrong with those Bob Angus shows in particular. Those still hold up over time, and for the most part. But people are producing amazing content now, and that's the stuff that let people focus on. It's sort of the old Kevin Smith old quote that he never felt like he needed to go back and visit all the old film stuff, the 20s and 30s and classic directors, because he learned all that stuff filtered through Steven Spielberg. He got to take that stuff, make it better, and then somebody like Kevin Smith could come along, and he's backtracked a little bit on that comment over the years, but ultimately it's that idea that yes, you're building on top of whatever came before, and however well it holds up is almost immaterial to the fact that it existed in that point in time and got us past this point and to this new point. And that I'm absolutely comfortable with that. It's, again, there's an awful lot of people that have learned the games and then introduced to games by me. And that's that is ideally what's going to fill my Facebook feed someday, is going to be all the people that ran into me at the show and learned how to play X game, and their life was made immeasurably richer because of it.
I won't forget Bob McCarty and you and the guy, I'm actually embarrassed I don't remember his name. Glasses, long hair, tall, thin, obvious cigarette smoker.
Larry Rosnine.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, yeah. The three of you in those rooms at Gamma doing demos. Yeah, I have fond memories of that. If I may, as COO of Amigo, right? And that's Chief Operations Officer, I presume. I don't have a corporate vocabulary. What exactly do you do as the Chief Operations Officer at Amigo?
It is very much the way that you would look at any other one or two person game company operation. It's basically soup to nuts. We have, we are a team of two, about to become hopefully 2.5. And we do, it's the marketing, it's the sales. And in the case of Amigo, it's sort of bifurcated a little bit in that we have the hobby industry side, selling through distribution and whatnot. And we also have a specialty market team of about 70 or 80 people, sales reps, who take the line out and go to the Learning Expresses and the non-hobby stores. So there's this whole team over here working on Amigo, in addition to all the kind of general hobby things that you see that go on here. And part of the challenge for me has been learning this side of the industry, which I was aware of, but it was never something that we worked directly on at any level in any of my previous jobs. And B, having this vision for how I would like to do marketing, how I would like to do social media, and just finding the bandwidth during the course of a day to try and make any of it happen. Especially when a lot of the things, especially on the specialty side, are very hands-on. There's a lot of phone calls. There's a lot of contacts, and you're doing those things, all of which would interfere with the idea that I'm going to take a couple of days and shoot video content for our YouTube or our TikTok channel. That's just something that can't happen. That doesn't happen. And, really isn't core to my job as COO. It may be fun. It may be the thing I want to do. And it's the thing that I would like to do at some point, but it's not the thing that I can point at and say, this is what's going to sell a couple thousand copies of this game today. So really, when you think about it, it's every aspect. It's marketing. It is production. It is prep work. So you're still doing proofing. We are doing a little bit, very little development, but we are doing reviews, doing product reviews. So we're taking meetings with designers to look at stuff, because Amigo Games US actually does have there are a couple of games that we have done that the German company has not done, although we primarily are kind of picking and choosing from the German line, what to bring over for the US line. And so there's a lot of similarity, obviously, between those two companies, but it really is kind of that everything needed to run a game company sits on the shoulders of myself and Corey, who's my, our other full-time employee here with Amigos. It's a challenge. It's very much a challenge that goes well beyond, uses all the skill sets I've learned to date, and constantly is forcing me to pick up some new ones here and there. And all of that kind of means that we've kept things moving, but as time has moved on and I've gotten more comfortable with aspects of things, I can do a lot of the things that kind of when I initially started with Amigo, I was like, I've got all these really cool social media ideas, things I want to do to be able to boost our presence and create some more buzz about our products. And, it takes a lot of time and bandwidth to do some of those things, and it's been time and bandwidth that it has just by its nature been required to be elsewhere.
With your skill set, I presumed that you could do very well financially in a different industry.
I am pretty clear on that. Yes, that probably yes. I could have done much better. I mean, certainly my marketing research days, I had a reasonable salary, and that reasonable salary definitely took a bit of a nosedive when I came into the industry. Initially, I very much have always been sort of a creature comforts kind of guy. If I'm making enough money to be able to keep my wall of games fresh and put food on the table and good food while we're at it, that makes me happy. That's what I need, and a few bucks in the bank is always a good thing as well. But I have no aspirations of buying my own my own island somewhere someday. Being able to take a few extra days and enjoy the city that I'm in after a show is, that feels good. That's a nice part, to be able to have that as part of my job, as part of the things I can do acceptably within my job. And, things will come from that.
Will you indulge me in staring into the crystal ball and looking at possible futures for the industry? The reason I ask is specifically because you worked for Mayfair at the time where Asmodee was able to acquire Mayfair. And now with recent activity, GTS, the Gamma Trade Show in 2020, right prior to the COVID pandemic, they were working with ACD, and I forget his name, very nice gentleman, but he's the head guy from Asmodee there. And I said, hey, I had my recorder, put it right in his face, and I was like, excuse me, da-da-da. He's like, oh yeah, Mike, I remember you. I'm like, hey, are you guys buying ACD? And he's like, well, Mike, no, we're not buying ACD. That didn't work out. But Asmodee wanted distribution. So now They bought another company that I used to work for, Miniature Market. I am very familiar with Steve Lusinski and his business and the success of his business. And my concern is, and I know this has been circuitous, but I worry about the Disneyfication of the industry, and that eventually we're going to have this lumbering titan that is owned by strangers from thousands and thousands of miles away that care nothing about the industry but own 80% of it.
First off, I think that for those of us who have been watching the Asmodee story unfold, there always felt like there was going to be a bad ending down the line, that it was going from venture capital to venture capital. And venture capital is a very predictable thing. It is acquire, it is consolidate, and then package and sell. That's literally their existence. And so as we went from venture company to venture company, there was always that sense that, okay, there is a hammer that's going to fall. And again, we're going to cherry pick the lines that they have within, and everything else is going to spin off. And it's going to be whatever manages to weather the storm. With the most recent sale of the Asmodee Group, and you'll forgive me if I don't recall right off the top of my head the company that bought them.
Oh, they're called the Embracer Group. Yeah, because it sounds very molestery to me. I was very uncomfortable. I was like, I do not like your name.
But more to the point, they are a company that both produces and sells content. They're not necessarily there to treat this thing as a business, as a pure ledger operation. This is something where they know they have companies that they know that are telling stories, that are producing goods, that are able to not only recognize the value of what they have, but be able to understand how to leverage that value within the universe in which they play in. So, Embracer has obviously deep video game roots. They have, they're kind of definitely branching out into the media side of things. So for the time being, I feel like that particular move was a step up in optimism for me. That feels like we're now part of a company that understands what they have, understands the universe that they play in, and understands how perhaps to leverage those pieces together with the pieces that they have over here and make something that feels more unified. That's something I feel like it's bringing together stuff rather than just packaging and consolidating. They're looking more at packaging and leveraging, and that's a positive. I just, in my heart of hearts, I feel like that move was probably a good one for Asmodee, and as far as being sort of a viable, interesting, exciting source for games. And like any other market, if things get too bloated, if things get too consolidated, you will find those cracks and springs, in the dam that people will find ways to get through and become successful in. There are certainly enough distributors that are not locked up with Asmodee. There are enough game studios that are not locked up by Asmodee, and they are producing in many ways really, really good work. If I am looking at the industry, there's so many things right now that we're just waiting to see how it shakes out for things like shipping, production prices, things like that. One of the things that has always concerned me, and I think is now coming to a head to a certain extent, with the ubiquitous of Kickstarter and the ability, the ease of using it. There are a lot of game designers that have the opportunity to bring their visions of these games to market. But there is a very different metric that is brought sometimes to publishing by a publisher versus a game designer. In the case of a publisher, we look at a game and we go, what do we need to put in a box for people to be able to play the game, for it to look good, and to meet a price point that is acceptable and attractive to the market in which we play in. So in the case of Mayfair, we were always very conscious about, okay, $35 is kind of where we start. That was our things like our Nuns on the Run or the Pompeii, this size box. This is a $35 box. What can we put in there to maximize its value that still sells through distribution at the price that it needs to sell through distribution, that we can sell at a profit, and the compromises we make are those that we made every day: cardstock instead of miniatures, paper rules, consolidation of components, all of those sorts of things. And many of the games that are on Kickstarter now and are doing well on Kickstarter are games that are these kind of bloated, what we would consider the deluxe version of the game before we've even released the game itself. Where you're paying $130, $140 for a game, and that game is not sustainable. That comes into the marketplace as an unsustainable product, except in the most extreme of circumstances, like literally Scythe level quality and background. And let's not forget the reason Scythe is working at retail at $130, $140 is because there was already so many copies of Scythe out there that you'd done that work. If you sold 2,000 of your game at $140 and expect for distribution or stores to pick that up and put that on a shelf, it's going to be sitting on a shelf for a long time, because that's just not a price point that casual hobbyists and those who are just discovering the hobby are going to be interested in getting, especially when there are so many options put out by publishers at those lower price points, and very consciously at those lower price points. So the overproduction of games, for as much as hobby people appreciate it and will rave about it, is not something that is relevant to the larger market in general. And the larger market in general, if anything, Amigo Games has taught me is there's a time and a place for being able to sell games at a convention and feeling good about all the people that we present it to. And then there's a time and a place to have a single piece of paper that says, I want to buy 2,000 of your game. Done. And to sell 2,000 of your game, you got some price points, some price constraints, and some things that you need to do that are not compatible with being the 100% pure vision of your game, as you may have it as a designer in your head.
When you were with Mayfair, the majority of the manufacturing that you did was in the United States, correct?
Yes, we were a point of pride that everything was labeled "Made in the USA." We had pieces we produced in overseas. Most notably, anything molded or plastic pretty much came from China. Anything, a lot of our dice came from the UK, and we did certainly some co-production stuff with Ludofact and some of the printers in Europe. But USA production was definitely a part of Mayfair's kind of business motto. And for aspects of the market, and so certainly, like for example, in the case of the specialty toy market, that was always the selling point. As much as the folks would go on BGG and say, "Oh, we don't care about this. We just want the best game at the lowest price." There's an awful lot of specialty stores in the U.S. that would beg to differ. And if you have enough of those that you're selling to, then that is something that becomes a point. And certainly that inflated the prices of Mayfair Games. Let's also be clear about that. Is we were definitely adding a certain amount of money as a surcharge for being able to have that as a company value. But with the current company, with Amigo Games, for example, I don't have an example I can point to right off the top of my head, but we have a series of icons we put on the bottom of all of our family games. One of those icons is European quality. So that whether or not we are publishing in China or we're publishing in Europe, or in the case of US and some of the card games, everything has been done. Everything we have tried to do is to ensure that anything that comes off a production line in China is the same quality, is the same paper thickness, is everything matches anything that you would see out of a European publisher, a European printer, and that our line should not matter. You should not be able to open up a box and say, "Oh, this came from overseas, this came from Europe, this didn't." But in the case of Mayfair, Made in the USA was a thing, and it was a marketing tool that we used to some success with some of the retail channels that we reached out to.
Is it possible to manufacture games without China at all?
It is impractical, put it that way. If we're talking about a card game, absolutely. You can go to Cartamundi in the U.S., you can go to any number of publishers here in the U.S. and get a perfectly absolute quality card game. May cost you a little bit more, but it's absolutely gonna be top quality. As much quality as you want to pay for, you can get in a box. If you want to talk about a more complex set of things, so we're talking about now like a Euro game with lots of cardstock and wooden cubes and things like that. That metric stretches out a little bit, but there are really amazing publishers still in Europe that can produce wood. In some cases, it's crazy. It's get Canadian wood, ship Canadian wood to Europe to be milled into the game piece to be sold back over here in the U.S. But again, those pieces are, still something that is very manufacturable. Those skills, that equipment exists, but now a little more of a premium if you want to have a particular locale attached to it. Once you get to plastics, once you get to molding, once you get to miniatures, those types of things, it is hard not to print in China. Their skill set there on that stuff is absolutely world class, and that's where you go for that. It is folly to think that you can get anything better here. Now, as 3D printing improves, I expect that metric to change a bit, but 3D printing is not where it needs to be for that to be a reasonable, sustainable, large manufacturing structure for purposes of producing games.
Yeah, my fantasy is to see 3D printing become that thing before I die.
There are definitely, it's definitely movement in that direction. And then that is absolutely a holy grail that I think, any publisher is looking to try and crack that nut. If they can, suddenly, they just have this leg up to be able to produce all sorts of things, all sorts of structures, all sorts of game components, and one of the things we've talked about with game designers is that, 3D printing gives a home game designer an amazing tool to be able to create some things, to create some toy elements for games that you wouldn't normally be able to produce. 10 years ago it would have been a CAD CAM operator, and it would have been all sorts of structurals and artists and all that. And at this point, a hobbyist can pretty much come up with a 3D model that can be fed into a 3D printer and can produce these intricate structures inside just a one-off game, one-off home prototype. Ignoring that tech is at your peril. You have to know that stuff exists and that you have access to that, even if it's access through third-party means like a maker group or a group that is kind of devoted to being able to to know how to make this stuff work and operate, and just linking up with them and saying, hey, I have this cool vision of something. Can you make this happen in real life? So I think that is tech that everyone should be aware of. It is a tech that certainly as a game designer, it allows you to think about some components and some ways of communicating information as part of a game that is non-standard, non-typical, and it's been impossible perhaps up to this point, or this generation of tech for creating pieces. But, in the same way that, that desktop printing changed how you do rule books and how you do layout of your materials, 3D printing is going to change the way that we produce and think about physical components in games. And, even if it's not something you are actively doing, it is something to be at least actively aware of.
If I can step back to something else that has irreparably, that's probably a shitty way of saying it, but has irreparably changed how gaming works, was Kickstarter. And I'm curious if you have a sense of how much business Kickstarter accounts for in the industry versus traditional 3-tier distribution. So does Kickstarter account for 10%, 12% of industry sales?
It's a number that I could achieve fairly simply. And to achieve that number, anyone would like to do this as an exercise to the reader. Simply go out to Kickstarter, and the Kickstarter actually presents metrics. You can look in the games category, which will include some accessories and some things. It's not really going to stretch it too far, and that number is available. So you can find out for 2021 how much money went into Kickstarters in the games category. Then you go over to something like ICV2, and you say, hey, what was the total industry number for toys and games in the industry last year? And take those two numbers and look at them. And you can graph that over time. Do I know those numbers off the top of my head? No. Do I know how to get them? Yes, I can have them in about a half an hour.
I'm going to go look. Yeah, you taught a man to fish. So when we're done, I'm going to fish.
Yeah. So what I can tell you is that Kickstarter has absolutely grown the market, although it has definitely in some cases robbed Peter to pay Paul. I think that the things that Kickstarter has done is been able to raise the valuation of games to a certain extent. So the fact that we have $70 or $80 games that people don't bat an eyelash at anymore is definitely an offshoot of Kickstarter, where we're talking, literally we have 4-digit all-ins on some of these Kickstarters, and even base games can run you, $230, $280 without really, getting too far down an all-in sort of situation. So it has given some price flexibility to the market that was not there, I think, previously. It has certainly allowed for some tech to be able to show how pretty a game or how cool a game can be presented on a table. And some of those are lessons that can be translated into mass market or to a wider hobby distribution model game. It has definitely taken money from retailers and put that and distributors and put that money into the hands of game designers directly. And that's, in a sense, that's not a bad thing. You want game designers to be successful, and in the case of Kickstarter, you are keeping the entire margin on a game. So rather than a publisher who has to sell that for 42% to a distributor, that extra 58% is going directly into the hands of the people who produce it, and offset by the fact that, of course, that person is probably not efficiently doing many of these things, and so there's a surcharge being added because they really don't know how to shop printers, or they really don't know how to get the right, that they really only needed this level of card stock, and they went to this level of card stock because they wanted it to be the best, for a card that isn't shuffled frequently or isn't, doesn't hold up to abuse, that isn't being abused every game multiple times. So the amount of money that Kickstarter is in, I think even retailers have resigned themselves to this is not going away. This is a part of our ecosystem. And, and then there are ones, that have embraced that. I mean, my local store, which is one of the best stores in the country, bar none, that I go to, Vault of Midnight, they frequently back Kickstarters at the retail levels, and they are, they're there in their store with those Kickstarter promos and selling those things as packages and doing very well doing that. It's a reality that we've all had to adjust to. And at the end of the day, the thing it hasn't impacted probably as much as people think it has is at the publisher level. As a publisher, we still have more than enough games we encounter every day for us to be able to have things to publish. We don't have to go out, cherry pick Kickstarters and find things or worry about, we are doing just fine on our own, thank you. And we still haven't seen, with very few exceptions, Stonemaier is an example, I think, of a company that has done this, where these Kickstarter-centric game companies are thinking about, well, how are we going to get our games into the specialty market? How are we going to get games into distribution? Are we pricing our games at an appropriate margin to be able to do that? So largely, hobby stores kind of exist in a little bit of a gray space. But if you're a Learning Express store or hobby store, Kickstarter means nothing to you. You are not selling $11.99 card games into Kickstarter doesn't exist for $12 card games to be done and then to move into that's not what's being produced there. What's being produced are $280 things that require you to buy a new kitchen table for. So as a publisher like Amigo, our bread and butter are 90% of our line are games that are under $20, and those are games that are 100% relevant to the market, to the specialty market, and in many cases the hobby market, to be able to sell to people who are not gamers, who are there to understand, to get a gift, to maybe explore this gaming thing, but not to break the bank, in the process of doing that exploration. So it really does exist in two overlapping but separate, Venn diagram spheres, and that's a split that I think people think may look more like this, and really, looks more like overlapping circles, and looks actually a whole lot more like latched circles with areas on either side.
I'm wondering, when you're talking about the hobby market, the industry that I am familiar with, I work with ACD, I work with Alliance, I work with Games Workshop, I carry Magic the Gathering, versus the stores that you're referring to that Amigo works with, that part of the industry or that portion of clientele, which I'm unfamiliar, which I'm going to refer to is people who are casual gamers, but they're not among the initiated like you and I are. I must assume that that potential market is vast in comparison to the market that I'm familiar with.
The potential is vast. And when you make sales in those areas, you are talking about print run level sales as opposed to case sales. The hobby market has become so glutted with product at this point that if something doesn't go on a shelf and turn quickly, there's something else that can take its place, especially if you can't get that item anymore because it's out of stock. It's gone. There's something else in your place the next day. So, hobby has this world of choices available to it, and how you want to monetize that. Do you want to go? Do you want to go deep in the lines? Do you want to be the store that has all the Carcassonne or all the Catan? Do you want to be the store that is, that has the Kickstarter stuff and is known for that? There are lots of opportunities, I think, for stores to be able to differentiate themselves in the marketplace and say, this is the thing we're really good at. And it's one of the things that I think the most successful retailers have always found a way that you can be front of mind in something, and the halo effect is that you'll bring people in for everything else. I always remembered when Marcus King. Okay, so Marcus used to have a store, obviously, in Michigan, and you'd go in. It was games on one side, and it was comic books on the other. But in the middle of the back of the store, there was two bookshelves that were nothing but all of the Marvel Essentials volumes, the big, thick phone book compilations of Marvel stuff. And he had them all. It was just this beautiful wall of everything that was occurred there. I'd never seen that anyplace else. And in my head, anytime I said, hey, I really, I'd love to see, it's been a while since I revisited the X-Men stories, the old Claremont stuff. Let's get that. And I knew exactly where to go because Marcus has a wall of them. There have been the stories that Catan is that thing, where they've got that 2 shelves and it's every expansion for Catan that is currently available. Even for Mayfair, you can never for something like Mayfair, you never expect a store to be full line, to have every single Mayfair title published. But we were always encouraging people to say, hey, for this little chunk of shelving, always have Empire Builder, always have Euro Rails, and then choose any 2 of the side crayon rail projects, Russia or India or Japan or whatever, Nippon Rails, whatever it might be, and then rotate those. So it always looks fresh, but people always know that you've got Empire Builder or you've got crayon rail games, there. And as a retailer, being able to say, I am the best at something. It's great that we carry lots of games, but if there's this thing you want, and it's a popular enough thing that many people will do it, that's the hook that in someone's head to say, well, that's why I have to go to this store instead of any other store.
So what is Amigo Games best at?
Amigo Games is amazing at family games and specifically card games. I mean, literally the bread and butter within the hobby. I can rattle off Bonanza, Saboteur, No Thank, Take 5, 6 Dim. Those are 4 evergreen games that any company, any one of those 4, a company should be able to hang their hat on and say, we know we're going to sell this many copies of this game every month from now through time immemorial. On top of that, within the casual, the mass market, we have games like Clack, which is a little magnetic disc game that has absolutely no traction in the hobby market whatsoever, but is our number 1 best-selling game because, man, the specialty toy market loves their little magnet game.
Because it's onomatopoeia. I mean, when you said the name Clack, I can hear those dolomite magnets. Kunk.
Exactly. And so so you have the visual, you have the audio hook there. You've got, and the game itself is really a lot of fun. Roll the dice, find matching things, and clack them into your magnetic stack. The newest game in that line, Clack Black, it's the same game. Roll dice, look for tiles that match that, except now you have a fly swatter with a suction cup on it, and you're whacking the tiles you want to pick up.
Dude, that is a hobby market game. Anything where we are aggressively attacking the center of the table, jungle, whatever it was, I forget the name of the game, but yeah, protect your nuts, those sorts of things. Oh, I'm telling you, that is one that I think the normal hobby store that has games demoing live could really, really move well.
Another great example of that is a game that we released late last year called Magic Mountain, which is a cooperative game. It's for 5 years of age and up. And the goal of the game is you're trying to get good witches at the bottom of the mountain before bad witches get down. So it's on a slope board. It's a dual layer board with grooves cut in it. So you've got paths all like Fireball Island. And simply the game is 5 marbles in a bag. And then on this path that goes down the hill, you have spots that represent each of the 5 colors of marble that's in the bag. And on your turn, you draw a marble out. You choose which of the 6 starting tracks at the top you're going to drop the marble. Anything that gets hit by a marble moves to the next space of the color of the marble. So if it's a red marble and you hit a piece, it moves to the next red space, wherever that is going down the mountain. There it is. That's all the rules. That's all you need to know. And you can play that as I'm just rolling marbles down the hill and hitting stuff. You can totally gamify that game and go, okay, so what we're going to try and do is hit pieces so that we get the bad witches to this side of the board so we can race our good witches to this side of the board and move them more quickly down to this side. Or, hey, we can sacrifice this bad witch in order to make a clearance. And you can play that as detailed or as casual as you want. And it was, there were people that were literally telling us it was their favorite game at Origin for a $25, family kids game that was done well and was done smartly. That's one of the beauties right now of, I think, the market in general. And this is not just us. This is Hasbro and Mattel and all that. is there's a recognition that games can be successful smarter, that it is possible to make a game for a young child that parents can literally find interest and amusement and challenge in, for that matter. The Amigo line, and you can obviously, this would translate into like Haba and Ravensburger and Blue Orange and some of the others that play in the space as well. But being able to present games that are smart and that have a decision tree that is narrow enough for kids to be able to play, or in the sense, even for example, one of the games that we're going to be releasing this year is a card game that is part of what we're calling our My First Amigo line, which are games that are designed to reach down to the 3 to 5 year old range. And one of these games is a game that starts at 3 and up. And at 3 and up, we don't need a decision tree. What we need is an activity. And we need that activity to be engaging, to be fun, and in this case, even to do a little teaching, a little STEM element of being able to teach number line. And so it's a game that, from a hobby standpoint, it's just not even pretend this is a game that anyone is going to want to play, even as a filler game. But to teach a 3-year-old how to take turns, how to be able to visualize 1 through 8 as face-down cards in front of you, to be able to have the excitement of a reveal and what happens when you reveal this card and where does it go. To teach those types of skills is important enough that a product can exist and can thrive to present that kind of experience, not a gameplay experience, because a 3-year-old is not going to really, in a lot of ways, not going to be able to make conscious decisions that are going to advance gameplay. A lot of that is mostly about the experience of having played. And so this one particular game is a game that is absolutely designed as an experience, as an activity that is going to give them some game skills that can absolutely translate into a more decision-forward game in the next 12 to 24 months. You basically see you have this 3-year-old and you teach them froggies and they understand.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, I gotcha.
And so then they turn 4 and they have a little bit more critical decision-making skills, and now you can hit them with those the simple this or that kind of games. I think our 4-year-old game is a game called Look, where you have cards and basically there's a picture, and on the flip side it's the same picture with a small variant. So a shirt with 3 buttons instead of 4 buttons or whatever. And so the game is cover your eyes. One person flips one of the 7 cards in the center, and then opens your eyes, and you have, first person to find the difference in the pictures that are on the board claims the card and gets in. That's the kind of thing that a 4-year-old, again, well within the skill set, but now there's a race element. There's a decision, there's that element that's going on in the game as well, not just an activity.
That's not far from Codenames.
No, and it is, and the party experience, the how to play that. There's a game we have called Flip It. Again, new one this year, Flip Picks rather. And Flip Picks is sort of it's a kind of, you have pictures on one side, you have 3 different pictures shown, and on the flip side are letters. And the object is you start with, for example, the picture side card in the center of the table. Everyone's got a bunch of cards. On the letter side, they're looking. You're trying to find a word that starts the letter that matches the picture that's on the table. You say that, you say, P, the pig there, and so you go, hey, P for pig. And you put that down. So now we've got this new letter card sitting on its letter side up. And you take your hand of cards, flip them over, and now everyone in their hand is looking for a picture that matches one of the letters that's in the center of the board for that. And you can be as creative as you want. You can be P for pig, H for hog, B for bacon. You can extend that out, and with kids and adults, you can start to vary that. So now it's like, okay, this round for all you fancy adults that think this is too easy, you have to use an adjective to describe. Your letter has to be describing a word that is an adjective that describes a picture, not just a literal noun, picture itself kind of thing, and kind of build on it from that. So creating games that create spaces that are as inclusive to kids and to young kids to be able to play together with adults, I think, is one of the things that Amigo, a lot of their line is really focused on, to create a family experience where you can have a 6-year-old play a meaningful game with adults and have a reasonable chance of success.
That's a good marketing line too. Amigo, build a family experience, or, create a family, something with just, crafting a family experience. I think that's a good tagline. All right. Before we get into my last question though, do you know Kurt Covert?
Yeah.
So
good moment. It's a Spurkendager. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's one of, people talk about, hey, if you were going to have your dinner with, famous people in history that you want to game with, I want to play, now that I've sworn it off, I want to play Illuminati with you and Kurt Covert and Ken Hite.
That would be a fun game.
If I'm at GTS this year and I can make that happen, I can't guarantee that I'm going to be there, but if I'm at GTS and the three of you are there, I'm going to do everything in my power to make that occur.
I got to tell you, I very early in my career knocked off a bucket list kind of experience. I did what it was basically the Baron Munchausen dinner at Gen Con. So there was this amazing Mediterranean, Mideastern restaurant within walking distance to the convention center. And this was after, of course, Munchausen had been released by James Wallace as the role-playing game, the storytelling game. And so, it's a bunch of people that are just in a room lying, telling these more fantastical stories than you possibly can. And every year we had really amazing groups, but I can tell you, I had an experience of, and it was basically like, it was $50 or $60 and it was whatever you wanted to eat, open bar, the whole works. And I still usually had enough money to tip the wait staff crazy and maybe walk out of there with a 20 or $20 or $30 in my pocket. But sitting at a table playing Munchausen, and literally as I'm looking around, the cast was Phil and Kaya Foglio, Doc Cross, who did the Toon role-playing game and all that sort of thing, John Kovalik, and James Wallace, the guy that wrote the book. And we had other guests as well. I mean, James Ernest was in that mix at one point, and stuff, but literally the story that, and basically that particular year, I just remember like the very first story was Kaya having to start the story by saying, yes, I was a man for a time, and just kind of going from there. But, having those minds and those people around the table, gaming can create magical experiences. And for me, and that was really early in my professional career. That was back when I really had no business trying to run an event for industry people as well. It was always a pro-am game. So it was half industry professionals and half casual, whoever wanted to pony up the money to be there. And the people that were there were always great, were respectful of the people that were at the table with them. But they were I have such warm memories of that experience of being able to sit down as a group of people that can play games at a high level and play those games. And so, yeah, it's good to have a bucket list item like that.
The last thing I want to ask about is we were off mic and we were talking about gamer apathy, and that had been something that had drawn your attention lately. So I wanted to ask you, what was it about gamer apathy that had been on your mind?
So you get people that for as long as I've done this job, and I look at prototypes and I work with designers, and there are still there's always that kind of measurable thread on Board Game Geek of those people that go, I'm just burned out. I'm not, games aren't really kind of my thing anymore, or I just don't feel like I'm seeing enough new stuff. And there are valid, I'm not going to say that that's a wrong thing. That it happens, and people are entitled to approach the hobby as they will, but there's a story that I tell, and I may have made this story up 100%. I preface it by saying, this may not be a real anything, and I may have come up with this in a fever dream, but it's good and it feels authentic, and I tell it anyway. So with that caveat in place, and there was an interview at one point where Joe Strummer of the Clash, of amazing punk pioneer, was asked his opinion of the fact that Rancid is basically running around doing the Clash, reggae inspired, punk rock. And Joe Strummer replied by saying that 20-year-olds don't want to see 50-year-olds playing 30-year-old songs. Every generation ought to have their own Clash. And for me, whenever I look around, it is an easy trap because our games are tangible and are built to last for decades. Sure, I can pull out El Grande and say El Grande is the greatest, one of the greatest touchstone area control games and remains one of the greatest area, control games that has been created. It's a great game. But innovations occur in both small and large ways across the industry. Something is streamlined. I think about something like It's a Wonderful World, which is just this great little tight engine that does manipulation of things, does formula engine building so well, and in such a tight little package. It's a joy to play that.
You struck a chord, man. That is a personal favorite. It is brilliant. And I love Seven Wonders, but I played It's a Wonderful World and I was like, this is the next evolution. It was like playing Stone Age for the first time. I was like, oh.
And I can't tell you how much I have held up this game to people in the game design world and said, you need to understand just how important and innovative this game is.
And that's Raiders of the North Sea for the listener.
Yes. So the fact that this is a worker placement game that takes one of the premises of the worker placement genre, which is you put a worker someplace and no one else can put a worker there. And now suddenly this game says you can put a worker anywhere you want. You just might not be able to do it within the order that you want because you have to put one down and pick one up. And because of that, you still have this amazing, delicious variety of tension and choices, but completely subverting one of the basic premises of the worker placement genre of I put there, you can't. So now literally you've been able to tease out this really new, interesting concept of choice of action, but not timing of action, and build a really smart, amazing game around it. It is a game that, so to kind of answer that kind of gamer apathy piece of it, for working professionally in the industry for as long as you have to be able to recognize and understand and seek out new and interesting voices and themes and opportunities, and be willing to open yourself up to those opportunities when they come along. There were people within within Mayfair that honestly felt like we should not release Patchwork because no one wants to buy a quilting game. We've had experiences where you're making an assumption about a marketplace that doesn't exist or shouldn't exist. And it's pretty easy to be proven wrong in a lot of those instances. The further down the line of you trying to guess what people don't like versus what they do like is kind of where you're going to start treading into some dangerous waters. One of my favorite stories is Essen. This was fairly early in my game evaluation career. There was someone had set up a meeting with me for Essen, and I was like, okay, this sounds, I'm sure, have a meeting. This is no problem. And we set up the appointment time, and his last email was, I'm so excited about this. This is my first pitch. I'm only coming to Essen from the UK, and I'm 21 years old, and this is my first, I'm like, oh, you sweet summer child. I can't believe, you're going to get so disappointed to have this experience of, coming over and me telling you no, that your first game, that's nice. So he presents this concept. I had talked with him afterwards. And so I tell this story with permission to talk about the mechanisms of the game. And it was a 2-player game. So you and I are playing this game, and you are playing a game where you are trying to get your troops from one corner of the board to the other. So you have tanks, infantry, and paratroopers. And so you have the ability to move these pieces and create this line. And I'm building walls and fortifications effectively to break up your access to be able to get your pieces as an unbroken string from one side of the board to the other. All right? Turn the board around. I'm playing a word game, a crossword puzzle game. I'm trying to create strings of words to be able to connect one side of the board to the other. You keep knocking out letters And I keep trying to reform words in order to be able to continue to make these connections to be able to complete my run. And it worked better than anybody, and it absolutely should have. And so we got done with this presentation, and it was like, I don't know who I would sell this game to. I don't know what kind of a market there is for this game. But as a person who listens to game pitches professionally, I am so energized by this game that I'm probably good for another 5 years of taking random pitches from people. It was just such this crazy off-the-wall thing that was put together in a cohesive, playable way that would have required some development work and would have required, some pieces to make it come together, and then to try to figure out how many of this game you could sell to people. But just this nutty, amazing mishmash between a crossword puzzle and a tactical war game, and it was just brilliant. And that's always, whenever I can look around and go, well, I'm seeing a lot of rehash stuff and a lot of stuff that doesn't excite me, that just feels like a kind of a lot of retread stuff. You never know when the next person is going to pitch you the 2-player war game crossword puzzle game. And, if nothing else, you have that to look forward to. And as long as you can keep that kind of enthusiasm and that kind of appreciation for the people who work in this industry, whether those be, the people who are publishers, the people who are designers, the people who help bring these visions to life as artists and marketers, and, the people that end up playing these games. Let people find their own clash, let people have these crazy, weird experiences that, don't do anything but, 400 copies on Kickstarter, and that's all that game ever has to be. Let's really celebrate as much and as many and as weird and as crazy of these things that are out there, because all of those things are eventually going to expand the market. None of this stuff represents contraction. All of this stuff represents bringing people who would otherwise not be interested in what we are doing to a level of interest in what we are doing. And that is where you want to be. That is where you as a company, as an industry, we are a growing industry. I cannot begin to tell you how much resistance I got told. I got told that I was flat out lying to people when I would say that Catan sold more copies every year than the year before, every year that Catan was in existence, right?
Who would dispute that? Now, and I'm not saying that to pander. I'm saying that as somebody who sold games for a decade and a half, right? Who worked for one of the largest hobby internet retailers in the world. That game sells.
Yep, that game that is what you got told by the people who look at Catan and say, "Oh, that's a 25-year-old design that's no longer relevant, that has been improved upon and by many multiple other games, and it's a game that no longer interests me as a hobbyist." Neglecting the fact that, again, the hobby is growing, new people are coming in every year. This game remains one of the most approachable. It remains, for people that have never played hobby games before, it remains this blast of new ideas. The idea that you are involved in every player's turn is such a radical thing. And it's not a radical thing to anybody who's in the hobby industry, but for anyone whose experience in gaming is Risk or Monopoly or whatever, and suddenly you've got a reason to be involved in every player's turn, that's a concept that is absolutely foreign and absolutely exciting. And we minimize that, we poo-poo that at our peril. We have to recognize that, yes, Catan is this brilliant game design and remains, part of its value isn't in its mechanics and its graphic presentation, but it's in the fact that, the player network. And this, this was quantified back with, when third edition D&D came out, with all of the, with the Commons license that was attached to that and the ability for people to play. Ryan Dancy spent so much time explaining to people that the value of a thing isn't just in the thing, but in the player network that is attached to the thing. And so, yes, D&D could let you create this simple license that let you produce content, because they're playing D&D, which is our stuff. And that's all the connection we needed in order to be able to maintain the economic viability of that. And in the case of Catan, it doesn't change the fact that you could drop a box of Catan on a table at a convention and find 3 players instantly ready to play. It has that kind of power. It has that kind of player network. And it still has that cachet beyond the hobby market to be able to have that kind of draw power, that star power. And you can choose to ignore it. You can choose to focus on little small aspects of that game that you particularly don't care for, or that don't give you the experience that you want as you've gotten more sophisticated in gameplay. But it does not change the reality that those moving parts that are in that box remain one of the most relevant, important, and economically viable games that is on the market today. And that's the focus, basically find those games that have those touchstones. For us, Bonanza. That game's going on its 25th anniversary this year, and it is a game that still remains one of the best pure negotiation games on bar none, flat out. If you wanted to play a trading game, I would recommend Bonanza over Catan even, simply because of the ability to do win-win trading in Bonanza, which very rarely exists almost in any other trade game that you choose. Bonanza is this just lovely package where I can be trading for a good reason. You can be trading for a completely other good reason. We both get something positive out of the deal. And the more you trade, the more you win. The more interaction you have with the people, you win. And that, as a game design piece, is pretty powerful. That's a pretty amazing thing to be able to bring to a game that says the more you play it in the moment, the better you'll do. And rewarding good play in that way with eventual victory is a great piece of game design that ought to be cheered on and remains, like I said, remains viable 25 years down the line. There are those of us that can, both products and people that have been here for 20, 25 years that still have enough enthusiasm and enough knowledge. And it's just a matter of making sure that we're doing our part to both present that material in a way that isn't intimidating, that isn't, it reads as a history book, and also presenting that material to the people that can take it and move it forward and do something new and do something exciting with it and create new spaces, new voices, new themes, new opportunities, new possibilities to continue to grow this hobby. The hobby has places to grow, places to expand to. And, in some cases we are pushing it. In some cases we are caretakers. In some cases we are spectators. But in all cases, being part of the forward progress of this industry is a joyous thing to be a part of.
Well, someday, when there is a gaming hall of fame and there is an analog or tabletop wing, you, sir, I hope, will be one of the initial inductees of said museum. It has been an absolute pleasure, sir. I want to say thank you for the opportunity. Coincidentally enough, I told my wife, I was like, this guy's great. He knows where all the bodies are buried. I certainly hope that I can get, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours out of it. And we've done quite well. So Alex Yeager, COO of Amigo Games, thank you again for the opportunity. I do sincerely hope to see you in person again sometime very soon. If we can't play Illuminati, at least so I can buy you an adult beverage.
I do on occasion consume adult beverages in public, so that would be delightful.
Well, Why We Game is a production of the Influence Foundation. Music by 99 Instrumentals. Audio editing by me, Brodor. By the time of this release, you've seen my Kickstarter, my Patreon video, whatever the thing is. I need money, give me money, money, money. Or at least tell your friends. Share, subscribe, etc.